Welcome to part 4 of our series on using battery 4. In this video we're going to take a look at the effects tab, and we can access that down at the bottom here next to the main tab. Just to the right we've got effects, and the first thing that I'd like to mention is just know that you can reorder your signal chain down here below. Each of these modules has a icon, this little grid up in the right hand corner. If we were to click, hold, and drag, we can then move that and then just go ahead and change how these are ordered. I'll go ahead and put that back. This is the default order once you open up battery, and the first module that we have is the saturation module. In the upper left hand corner, as with all modules, we do have a power button available. You can click to activate or deactivate, and just know that if you come down below and grab a particular parameter, then that will actually power on. And mainly you want to keep an eye on the power is if you are on a slower machine like myself and you find that your CPU is spiking, you can come in and disengage some modules and save on CPU. Next we have a drop down menu here where we can access factory presets, and this could be a good place to start and experiment with if you're new to working with saturation or battery. We also have a place for user presets, so if you've made some adjustments or some tweaking down below and you want to save those, just click on Save Preset, and then you can find those here in different songs and access them that way. Now the saturation module is going to allow you to apply expansion, compression, and saturation effects to your samples, and these effects are actually applied to individual sample bits versus the overall sound. We have 3 different modes available to us, and we have drums, tape, and classic. Now the controls down below are going to vary just a little bit here. The classic and drums, the warmth and high frequency controls down at the bottom are not available. If we come to the tape mode, then they are. Each of the 3 does have this gain knob here, and raising the gain will actually increase the amount of tape distortion and compression that's being applied to your sample. And when you're working in the tape saturation mode, the warmth knob is going to allow us to adjust the boost or cut of the low frequency of the effect, and we can adjust this by plus or minus 3 dB. Next to that we have a high frequency knob, and this is going to allow us to set the high frequency roll off, and we have a range between 12 and 20 kilohertz available. And lastly we have an output knob. And I've got a little 2-bar phrase that I put together to kind of demonstrate some of the functionality of these modules. So I'm going to go ahead and start playback. And actually I'll solo this snare. That's what we're working with down below here. And just to give an idea, we'll select a factory preset. Let's choose drums, cranked. Let's choose tape, adjust the gain, the warmth. Actually, let's take some of that out. Classic. And the drums. So again, the best thing to do is just experiment with the saturation module and all of these modules, and that will give you a better idea of what you can accomplish with each. And for now we're going to move on to the lo-fi module. I'll just go ahead and power that on. We also, as with the saturation, have a drop-down menu with some factory presets, an area for storing user presets if we made any adjustments that we would like to save for future use. And at the very top we have these 2 large knobs for controlling bits and hertz. If we were to move these all the way to the right, then this is going to disengage that effect. So right now there is no reduction in hertz or bits when they're moved all the way to the right. And I'm actually going to solo our hi-hat here and playback and make this lo-fi active here. And we can immediately hear how that's been made a bit more gritty. We're all the way down to 3.5 bits. I can raise that up to 8, 10, all the way up to about 15 bits is at the top. Our hertz ranges from about 95 kilohertz down to 50 hertz. We also have a noise here, so that is active. If I take that out, we can get a better idea of what's going on with the bits and hertz. Bring the noise back in. And the color basically adjusts kind of the frequency or the warmth of the noise. And lastly, we have output. And I'll go ahead and power that back off. And actually, I want to come back to the snare and power the low off, or the lo-fi off here as well. Take the solo off of that hi-hat. Next in line, we have a filter and EQ module, and I'm actually going to switch to the vocal sample to cover this one. As with the saturation and lo-fi modules, we do have a menu with some included presets, and we've got actually quite a few here. And these are going to be particularly useful if you're going to work with the peak notch or effect modes of this module to give you a better idea of what those are capable of. But let's just go ahead and take a look at the 7, I believe, different modes that this filter and EQ module has available. At the top here, we can change from those. We start off with solid G EQ. Next, we have 3-band EQ, low pass, high pass, band pass, peak notch, and effect. And as we go through these, you'll note that the controls down below will change slightly depending on which mode we are in. And let's just come back to the solid G EQ and start from there. With each mode, you're going to have a visual display here of the adjustments that you're making with the controls down below. Most of us are familiar with equalization, so I'll just briefly go over this here. We have a low tab for working with the low frequency, low mid, and high. With low and high, take note here we have a bell adjustment where we can toggle the shape of the bell with this button here. And that's for the low and the high. When we come to low mid and high mid, we have this Q for controlling the bandwidth. So if I were to come to the low mid and increase the gain here, we can then adjust the bandwidth that's being affected by that gain. And of course, we can adjust our frequency and our gain. And then we have a general output for the whole module. And each of the low mid, and high are going to have the frequency and gain controls. Moving on, we have a 3-band EQ. Band 1, we've got frequency and bandwidth control, gain. This is going to be the same for each of the 3 bands, and so we can move on from here. And then we come to the low pass, and actually I'll go ahead and start playback. We actually have 4 different modes that we can choose from here. 1-pole, 2-pole, 4-pole, and daft. The controls at the bottom are cutoff, resonance, and gain. Daft, I believe, yeah, they're going to be the same for each of these different modes, actually. I'm going to go ahead and start playback and just check out the low pass on our vocal sample. So of course, adjusting the cutoff, we can introduce some of those higher frequencies back in. We can adjust the resonance, which is going to boost a small range of frequencies around our roll-off point here. Come to the 2-pass, and you can see how this is going to be a more significant drop. The 4-pass or 4-pole will be even greater. And then next we have high pass. It's going to have 4 different modes which are similar to the low pass and daft here, with cutoff, resonance, and gain. Next we have band pass. This also has 4 different modes, and the controls for these will actually change for the last 2 here. We have cutoff, resonance, and gain for the 2-pole and 4-pole ladders here, and the last 2 we have cutoff and resonance available to us. And then the last, well, we've got 2 more modes I believe here. We've got peak notch, and we have similar available controls for cutoff, resonance, and gain. But as with the band pass, when we move on to the last 2 modes here, we only have cutoff and resonance available to us. Now, a peak filter is basically going to add a resonant peak to your sample without attenuating it much, and the notch filter will allow you to remove a specific frequency from your samples, and it's kind of the opposite of a bandpass filter. And let's actually take a look at the notch. I'm going to go ahead and start playback again here, and our resonance is up on this. If I go ahead and were to take that down, we can see that we're cutting a very narrow range of frequencies out. And if I were to adjust the frequency that we're working with, and we can actually raise that resonance back up and boost a very specific range. Okay, and the last one that we have here is effect, which actually has 5 different modes here. We've got formant 1 and 2, and these are designed to mimic the frequency response of the human vocal tract. And these have talk, sharp, and size controls for both of these 2 modes. We then have Val A and Val B, which are Val filters, and these emulate the resonant frequencies of the human tract as well. And these will actually only have cutoff and resonance controls down below. The last one that we have available is phaser, which provides a type of comb filter effect and provides you with controls for cutoff and resonance. And I definitely recommend experimenting with these because they're going to give you some really cool effects with audio samples or any samples, and you can get kind of a talk box effect with these, and some really cool sound available. The last thing that I like to mention about working with filters is they can be processor intensive. So if you're on a slow computer, you want to pay close attention to how many of these you are using, and if you find that your CPU is nearing the limit or you've got a lot of activity, then this is one area that you can take a look at and just temporarily power those off or render the cells in place. Now go ahead and power that off and move on to our compressor module. Again, at the top we have power and factory presets here. Next we have a VU meter down below here where we can see how much of our audio signal is being compressed or affected by our settings. And we actually have 3 different compressor types that are available to us. The first here is the solid bus comp, and then we have classic, and then pro. Now the classic and pro, we don't have makeup and mix controls available to us. If I come back to the classic, you can see that those are grayed out. And the solid bus comp, these are available, and we'll take a quick look at what those are for in just a second. The first control that we'll look at though is the threshold here, which basically determines when the compression will become active on your incoming signal. The lower that we have this set, the more heavily your signal will be affected. The higher we have that set, the less it will be. And that's kind of an oversimplification, but going in depth on compressors is a bit beyond the depth of this, so I just want to give you a general idea of how these controls function. And so next we have ratio, and this will determine the output level relative to the input level. So we have a range of 1.5 to 10. So this will be 10 to 1, we've got 5 to 1, 4 to 1, and so on. And if we were to set this to say 4 to 1, what this actually means is that if our incoming signal reaches 4 dB over what we've set our threshold to, then only 1 dB of increased level will actually pass through the output of the module. Of course, we can use the output to increase the gain, but that's essentially what the ratio is going to allow you to set control. The output level in relation to the incoming audio level. Next we have attack, and this will determine how quickly the compressor reacts to incoming audio whenever it's exceeded what you've set in your threshold here. The release next to that is going to determine how quickly our regular audio level returns after the incoming signal has dropped below our set threshold. And then we have the makeup knob, and again, this is only available in the solid bus comp mode. And this is going to let you compensate for gain reduction that may occur from your settings, particularly what you have set in the ratio. Now, the mix is going to allow you to blend between the compressed audio signal and the original unaffected audio signal. So if we were to come all the way to the left, we're only going to hear the uncompressed original audio signal. And if we come all the way to the right, then we're only going to be left with the compressed audio signal. And then of course we have the output that I mentioned earlier. And one other thing that I'd like to mention to keep in mind when you're working with the compressor module here or compression in general is that any adjustments that you make to audio levels, so if you were to adjust the output of the saturation module or the output of the lo-fi, etc., then this is going to affect the compression here. So if you were to raise that up significantly, then you're going to get a lot more compression here. So just keep in mind that what you do down the signal chain is going to have an effect here on your compressor. I'm going to go ahead and deactivate that. And the last module that we have to cover is the Transient Master module, which is actually a compressor itself, but it's designed to specifically control the attack and sustain of a sound versus following the amplitude. So this means that it is not so much affected by changes in level of incoming audio signal like we were talking about with the compressor here, but deals more with the attack and sustain of a sound. And we have some presets here that we can take a look at, and let's actually go ahead and play back. What are we on here? The vocal. Let's take a listen to the snare and what this can do on the snare. I'll go ahead and power that on. And I should talk about what these controls do really quickly. So with the attack increasing, we'll add more punch. So the further right we go, we're going to add more punch, and decreasing will reduce sharp attacks. So we're going to get a softer sound the further left we go. Now the sustain is basically going to have an effect on the body of your sound or your sample. And then lastly, we have input and output controls. So with that, let's go ahead and play back again. And we can hear, now that we're to the left on the attack, that snare is a hell of a lot softer. Then as I come to the right, it's definitely getting a lot more snappy. And then our sustain is going to control the body. So I believe this should get fuller. Yeah. Okay, and so that is the last module in our effects tab, and we will wrap up here. In part 5, I believe we're going to be moving on to next. We'll take a look at the modulation and setup modules or tabs, and then in part 6 we will cover the editor and master tab. And the master tab should go pretty quickly because we've already covered these modules in this video just now, except for the limiter. And we'll cover the buses and some routing, the reverb and delay, but these should go by pretty quickly. So hope you gained some useful information, and thank you for watching.